All right. It is time for another one of your questions about work. I'm Roy. I'm a startup investor in the future of work. Usually I'm here with Min. Today is day, I think, 117. And today we've got a special guest who is going to ask our question today. So our special guest is Hady Barry, who was, I first met when she was my student in the course that I teach every year at Haas at Berkeley's Business School. And in that course, people make media. And I still talk to this day about the podcast that she made. It was called Love in the Age of Minder, about dating in the context of being a Muslim in a modern community that's diverse and lots of folks. And then I tracked her career. She went and most recently was at Zipline working. Are you still in Cote d'Ivoire right now?
I am actually. I'm in Abidjan right now. Yeah.
And so, and she was there. She's really interested in companies that are doing innovative things focused on Africa. And she's got a question that's a big one for lots of folks. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Hady, to ask the question.
Hi, Roy. It's a pleasure to be here. So my question is a big one for me right now. It is, how do I take a break without feeling guilty about my career progression? And that's the
Yeah,
space where I am right now.
I think there are two. So do you mean a break between between jobs in that case, or do you mean a break like when I'm overworked and I just need a few days off, or both?
So I think it's almost a break when you decide that you just want to take a break from working and you don't have an idea when you're going to enter the workplace again. And that
Yeah.
has partly to do with like burnout. Yeah.
So look, the first thing I would say, I've had a couple episodes like this in my career. I detail them on LinkedIn, like I call them unemployed happily and unemployed unhappily, because they were for different reasons. But you're describing the situation where somebody has the opportunity to decide to pause.
Mhm.
And I think, so first of all, I'll just say it's different depending on everything from like how wealthy you are, like, race, gender got to factor into it in ways that I can't fully understand, privilege of all forms. So I'm just going to share my experience, which is I think there's two aspects to it. One is the practical kind of trade craft of like, okay, I want a break or I need a break, whether it's mental health or I just want to think about things for whatever your reasons are. How do you craft your return, assuming you want to return to something professional? And it could be like, obviously moms go through this in a certain way. And I think
Yeah.
there's a, a basic thing, which is just thinking through imagining what that return may be like really helps a lot. Because if what I mean by that is if you're like, okay, I'm going to take 6 months off, and then there's going to be a tough conversation because people will be like, why did you take 6 months off? But I'll address it by doing XYZ. Just gaming it out in your head can both
Mm.
generate strategy for you, including when you take time off, there's some important choices you make, like what identity do you wear to the world? I'd missed that you had left Zipline, for example.
Mm.
I took my time off. I knew what I was going to do after that, so it was easier. But like I changed my LinkedIn title to doing nothing because I just wanted people. My goal there was for them not to bother me. But if instead my goal was I do want to hear from them, then I might have changed it to something else. I might have changed it to like one of those like looking for a blank kind of thing. So there's some trade craft around the planning of what you do while you're out and how you imagine being back, which I think that's helpful for me for the core of your question, which is the inner experience. Like that plan helps calm my inner experience.
Mm.
And, the guilt to me is, I mean, look, managing one's inner life is the most underrated professional skill. Ben Horowitz has that thing about the hardest part of being CEO is managing your own psychology. Yeah, CEO is a tough job like
Yep.
that. But hardest part of being anybody,
Yeah.
professionally or otherwise, is managing your own psychology. And so then I just get at like, okay, well, what is driving that? Do you have a hypothesis on what's driving that? Is it because you just have a tendency toward guilt, like which many of us, I do, many of us do, in which case that is then an issue to work on. Is it about some feeling? And I'll ask you, Hady, for you about, is there some specific
Mm.
thing driving it? But there's a diagnosis and then a response, kind of be the scientist operating on yourself, which if you're in a position to be able to do it, mental health professionals are awesome with that. Like my therapist, my coach, like all very, very helpful in this, but that's the practice to be in, is a self-diagnosis and response. It sounds like you have some specific thing that's going on.
Yeah, absolutely. I think for me, it was with the pandemic. I think beginning in March, my job used to involve a lot of travel. And beginning in March, I got to not travel at all and be in a place for more than 2 weeks at a time. And that got me very interested in rest and how much better I felt now that I didn't have to travel, and made me
Mm.
realize that I never used to think of rest as something quite radical or quite important. And I was trying to think, okay, how do I keep this epiphany with me and do something with it? And ultimately, I just never found a way to weave it into the pace at which I work. And I think that's something personal, like the relationship to work, the value we get from work kind of superseded the importance of rest in my life. And so
And so
for
what,
me, it's better to stop working than
sorry,
to.
I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I was trying to get at what is the source of the guilt then?
It's it's partly being like child of immigrants. It's like just like in her early 30s, like I'm tired of working, whereas my parents are still working. It's like what right do I actually have to take a break? So that's part of it. Yeah,
Yeah,
and
and look,
also the optics of it. Yeah.
that there's such a world of issues around this. I'll just say I really applaud your knowledge of yourself. Like what I hear in that is you saying like, oh, I wish I could have rested. Reaching out, but the NAP ministry is a great resource. I wish I could have rested at work. It just didn't work for me. I think most professionals assume that they'll be judged to a degree that they will not be, or it's like, yeah, be
Mm.
judged. And it's a price you're going to pay. Now, easier for me to say, than maybe somebody at a different point in their career. But I wish I had been able to say that to myself and believed it back in an earlier point in my career. And then you have all the like, well, I can have a job and lots of people can't. Who am I to do this? Or my parents. I mean, I'm the son of
Mm.
my parents, might think X, Y, Z. And I think that the critical thing there is not like just because somebody else has suffered doesn't mean you suffering makes the world any better. And I think it's true for a lot of things in under COVID right now. It's like, look, I'm fortunate to have a job. I feel guilty sometimes struggling with my own work because it's like, hey, who the fuck does this guy have to complain about? And the answer is nothing. And me sublimating, burying, ignoring my own inner life doesn't help anybody else who doesn't have a job feel better. So I got to work on me. That's all I have. And so you can, I think work can do the same thing. You can if you want to. And I think it's a courageous thing to identify it and just name it as a price. Like, hey, my parents might be mad. Does that make it wrong? Not necessarily. You may have talked to them about it, but that's a price to be aware of and to potentially pay. And I kind of think of it with all these things is it's not you can or you can't or you should or you shouldn't. It's there's a price to pay. Can you minimize
Mm.
this? Can you identify it? Do you want to pay it? And if you want to pay it because it's worth it, because you're worth it, then I think it's beautiful.
Yeah,
Anyway,
that
that's
resonates.
again not advice because I don't want to tell you how to live your life. No,
I'll take it if it was.
everyone's words, my experience.
Thank you.
But
That's helpful.
no, I mean, and I really appreciate you asking the question. It's a hard one. Most advice is like somebody's going to be like, "Well, I took off. I think it's really good when you're age 32. You should take a year off." It's like, who knows? All right,
Yeah.
I'm back not tomorrow because I am taking the day off, but back next week and to be continued. And Hedy, I just feel that it's such a like a privilege for me to get to be here with you, with a former student, and just kind of continue to track with you as your life unfolds. So thank you for giving me that opportunity.
Likewise. Thanks for having me.